The NFL Draft Combine is fully underway, and 14 Longhorns have been invited. So, on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, I project where I think all 14 Longhorns that were invited to the NFL Combine will be drafted. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, 14 Longhorns invited to the NFL Draft Combine. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot, only behind Ohio State, of course, who had 15. But 14 is a lot, and it's a Texas record, in fact. So we're going to try to see if we can get all 14 of these Longhorns drafted. That'd be a huge accomplishment. So that's in the first segment, where I think all 14 of these players, what round or where they'll be drafted. In the second segment, the women's basketball team continues to dominate or stay number one, right? Since they've been number one, they were able to beat Georgia, and then now they beat Mississippi State on the road, right? So taking care of business as the number one team in the country. We discussed that in the second segment. And then in the third segment, Trey Johnson. I mean, this team may or may not make the tournament, but is Trey Johnson on the Mount Rushmore of Texas men's basketball players? I feel like he has to be at this point, but we discuss in the last segment. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get right into it, man, because it takes a long time to talk about 14 different players, right? So the first one is Kelvin Banks. And I think Kelvin Banks is a lock to go in the first round, but I'm going to say top 15, right? I'm going to say top 15. I want to say top 10, but I feel like this draft is going to be a reverse of like the last draft that we saw where it was just a string of offensive players and then we didn't see a defensive player into the teens. Like you're going to have two quarterbacks drafted in the top 5 or top 10, right? In Shador and Cam Ward. You're going to have a lot of defensive players, right? Like, a Mason Graham, a Abdul Carter, possibly even a Will Johnson, a Michael Williams. So it's going to be a lot of defensive players going early on, right? And I just don't know if there's room for two offensive tackles, as good as Kelvin Banks was in the top 10. And it seems like the consensus is that Will Campbell will be the first tackle taken off the board. So I think that Kelvin Banks is going to go somewhere in that 10 to 15 range. Maybe even to the Cowboys. I don't think they'll make that pick. But, yeah, I think he's going to go top 15. I want to say top 10. Obviously, he's a lock to go first round. But like I said, I think it's going to be a lot of defensive players plus those two quarterbacks. Maybe even that wide receiver from Arizona. He probably goes top 15. So I think ultimately Kelvin Banks will go between 10 and 15. So I'll say top 15 for him is where I think Kelvin Banks will be drafted. He'll be the first Longhorn off the board. Jahdae Barron, I think he finds a way to get into the first round, right? I think that just the way he's presented himself already in interviews, I think he's going to test well enough to, confirm what you saw on tape, that he's an absolute dog and can play and can cover at the NFL level. And I think that some team has to be smart enough to say, we want him in the building for the next 5 years, 4 years on a rookie contract, plus a 5th-year extension. We really want him to be the quarterback of our secondary for the future. You know what I mean? But somebody's going to make sure that they take him. There's not 32 players in this draft better than Jahdae Barron. And somebody's going to be smart enough to see it. So I think he'll be a first-round pick. I think he's going to go, I'm going to say about pick 17 or after. Between 17 and 32, somewhere in that range, right? I don't want to say after the 20s. I think he could still, crack into that top 20. So I'm going to say between 17 and 32. I think that's where Jahdae Barron ends up going. And, yeah, I think he tests well enough to get himself into the first round. That 40 is going to be key, though, because there are questions about his speed, but I think he's going to run a good enough 40. It's the biggest 5 seconds of his life. You know what I'm saying? So I think he's going to run a good enough 40 to get in the first round. Matthew Golden, right? Somebody who probably came into the season 3rd, 4th round talks, right? Is now in first round talks. And I think he's going to be in that 20 to 32 range. I think he's going to put himself in the first round as well. I think he's going to test well. The tape showed that he can do anything as a wide receiver, make any type of catch, run any type of route. So, I think that he's definitely going to, put himself in position with the testing and with the interviews, seems like a great kid. You never heard anything bad about him or anything like that at U of H or at the University of Texas. So, and we know Sark and staff have been bringing in some really good high character guys. Since this turnaround has started at the 40 acres. So, um, yeah, I would anticipate that he would end up in the first round. Right, it's a passing league. You need premier wide receivers. I could see. Like remember a couple of years ago where like Quentin Johnston and Jordan Addison and all of them kind of went like in a string. Zay Flowers, there was like every other pick. Um, or even that year where like CD Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Henry Ruggs, all of them went kind of at one point, like all in a span of 10 picks. I think that's going to happen this year where you're going to see like 3 wide receivers taken in the last like 10 to 12 picks. And I think Matthew Golden will be one of them. Quinn Ewers. There's a lot of talk about where Quinn Ewers could go in this draft. I saw somebody say 6th round. Quinn Ewers isn't making it to the 6th round. There's people saying that he could be a 3rd round pick, right? I'm going to say 2nd. I'm still going to say that quarterback position is too important. We always think that less quarterbacks will be taken in the first couple of rounds than there are. But at the end of the day, it's the most important position on the field. And I just find it hard to believe that 62 players or 64, will come off the board. 64 players will come off the board and Quinn Ewers will still be there, right? At the most important position in football when he played really well, had a lot of success, and he's coming off a torn oblique, right? So, maybe the injury concerns, push him down a little bit. Maybe his lack of mobility pushes him down a little bit. But I just can't see the 3rd round starting and Quinn Ewers still being there. So I would say 2nd round, 3rd round at the worst, but I got faith he still goes in the 2nd. Alfred Collins is interesting, right? Because when he's playing at his best, he looks like a 1st round pick, top 10 pick. Like he looks like one of those defensive tackles that could just take over games and wreck games, right? And I know he mentioned in his interviews Chris Jones, right? He wants to be a player like Chris Jones. And I think at his best, he could be that type of player. And we've seen Chris Jones for years just wreck game plans for that Chiefs defense, right? And be such a big part of what they're able to do. I don't think he makes it into the top 32 picks, but I think he's a lock to go in the 2nd round. I'll say top 45. But a team potentially could be getting a steal in that. And if your 2nd pick of the draft is Alfred Collins, you're potentially getting a steal, right? And that's a really good draft class. You know what I'm saying? If your 2nd pick is Alfred Collins, because I really think he could end up being one of the best players in his draft. Certainly has the potential to do so. But I'm going to say top 45. I don't know if he did enough to put himself in 1st round talks. Isaiah Bond. I think he's going to run in the 4.3s. He came out and said he's going to break Xavier Worthy's 40 record of 4.21. He's not, you know what I mean? But you love the ambition. You love the confidence. But I think he's going to run himself into the 2nd round, right? Didn't have a great year. Tape wasn't great. Injuries, just production, kind of took a step back from Alabama. Not really too much of his fault. Like I said, he sprained his ankle twice. But still, right? You went to Texas to improve your draft stock, and coming into the year, he was a 1st round pick. Now he's probably a 2nd. I don't know if he can run himself into the 1st round. Now if he runs a 4.21, anything close to Xavier Worthy's, then he probably will, right? But I think he's going to be in the 4.3s, and I think he'll be a solidified 2nd round pick, which isn't bad at all, right? It's not what you thought coming into the year. For sure thought you're going to be a 1st round pick. But I think based on everything he dealt with this year, if you can still get taken in the 2nd round, that's a win for Isaiah Bond. Jaden Blue, it's tough, right? Just because he's always been kind of like a 3rd down back, essentially, and it's easy to get labeled, right? And he's going to probably go into the draft with the label of not being an every down back. And I don't know if I would use Jaden Blue as a every down back, but you can kind of get that label of being a gadget player, right? And I think he could be a solid, number 2 on any team, but he's probably going to get that label of being a gadget player. But I do think he'll test really well. I think he's shown that he can catch the ball at a high level. Really just the biggest question marks are how many touches can you give him and will he hold on to the ball, right? But, I think that he'll be able to test really well. A running back running in the high 4.3s, maybe even low 4.2s. I think at the pro day and at the combine, he'll show an ability to catch the ball. Running back drills for what they're worth. And I think that he can solidify himself as a 4th round pick, right? I think Jaden Blue can solidify himself in terms of going into the 4th round or higher, right? I think probably 4th round, though. I can't see him going later than that, but also can't see him putting himself in a position to go too much earlier than that when, like I said, you're more than likely drafting him as a 2nd running back or a 3rd down running back. But 4th round, I think it'll be too enticing for a team to pass up, right? A home run hitter like that. Andrew Makuba, I think he goes third round, right? He came out and said he's the best safety in the draft. I'm not sure if he's the best safety in the draft, but I do think he's worthy of being a third round pick. And I do think he's a player that's going to come in and be an asset to secondaries for a long time, right? That's just a really smart, savvy player with a lot of experience. Like I said, I'm not sure if he's the best safety in the draft, but hook him, right? That's a third round pick. I got him going third round. Jake Majors. I think he's going to be a really good center in the league. I think he's going to be in like that second tier of centers. I'm not sure if he's going to be like, the all pros, like the Landon Dickersons, Jason Kelsey levels, centers like that, Tyler Linderbaum's. But I think he's going to be a really solid center, maybe like a Tyler Biotish went from the Cowboys to the Commanders. I think he's going to kind of be in that tier, like just a really solid center for 10 plus years. I think he's going to go in the fifth or sixth round. Jake Majors. I can see Jake Majors going in the fifth or sixth round. Hayden Connor, same thing, right? Probably sixth round. You know what I mean? Really good pass blocking guard. Uh, you know, can bring in a little bit more in the run game, but a really good pass blocking guard. It's a pass blocking league. Coming from one of the best teams in college football. I think a team's going to take a late flyer on a Hayden Connor and get a really good player at the guard position that can come in and compete. You know what I mean? For snaps early on. Get a steal as a 6th-round guard that can come in and play right away, or a player that'll eventually crack the starting lineup and do a lot of years in the National Football League. Barron Sorrell, I mean, he plays a premium position. I thought he was really good at the University of Texas. Um, doesn't seem like scouts are as high on him as I thought he would. You know what I mean? I thought he could come out and be like a 4th-round pick. So I'm gonna say 6th-rounder, right? I'm gonna say a team takes Barron Sorrell as a 6th-rounder and gets a steal, like that player like Moro Ojomo. I think Moro Ojomo went in the 6th round, and he's been a part of the Eagles' rotation, albeit maybe the second or third wave, right? But he's been a part of that Eagles pass rush for 3 years, been to 2 Super Bowls. I could see Barron Sorrell being a player like that, right? Like, oh, this 6th-round pick that we got from Texas, wow, he's making plays. I could see him in that role for sure. So I say 6th round. Gunnar Helm, I think 3rd round. I think with his ability to block, what he's shown in terms of being a receiver, his ability to make plays after the catch, his athleticism, I think he's going to be a 3rd-round pick. So I got Gunnar Helm there, 3rd round. Cam Williams, I'm going to say 2nd round, right? It was a lot of 1st-round talk into the injuries and then some bad games against some of his better, opponents this year. But I just think what he brings to the table in terms of his size, his athleticism, tackle being a premium position, even if he's on the right side. I mean, he looks like that Mekhi Becton type of player that could just absolutely demolish whoever's in front of him, right? And he's really athletic for a 350-pounder at 6'6". So I think Cam Williams, probably late 2nd round, but I still think somebody ends up taking him in the 2nd round. And, when he's at his best, really good player, just a physical specimen. Vernon Broughton, if I got Alfred Collins going 2nd round, I got Vernon Broughton going early 4th, late 3rd, early 4th, right? Really good interior player. Not somebody that just jumps off the screen. Not somebody you're coming in and expecting to be an all-pro or a perennial Pro Bowler, but somebody in that interior rotation that can come in and make a lot of plays. You know what I mean? So Vernon Broughton, like I said, I think late 3rd, early 4th. So I think we do see 3 1st-round picks on this Texas football team for the first time since 1980. And ultimately, based on my projections, I hope I'm right. I think all 14 Longhorns that got invited to the combine will, in fact, get drafted. All right, quick word from our sponsors, and then we talk about this Texas women's basketball team, right? They did have another close battle. Well, I guess the last game wasn't close. They won by 31, right? This one was actually close from start to finish, but once again, Texas fight. They showed it. That's why they ended up in the winning column once again. We discussed. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com, MEET fabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. That is meetfabric.com. Fabric by Gerber Life. All right. So talking about this Texas women's basketball team and number one team in the country for the first time since 2004. Did start off a little shaky in their last game against Georgia, but ultimately came out and whooped them in the second half, outscored them by like 27 points, and ended up winning by 31. I think held Georgia to like 10 points in the second half or something like that. It was crazy. And that 26 points they held them to was actually tied for an SEC record, right? So nobody has ever scored 25 or less in an SEC conference game. 26 is the record, but it has been done before. So Texas, I mean, the defense, right? They came out and really took care of business. Like I said, ultimately winning by 31, even though the offense started off a little shaky. So then they come back on last night or Thursday night and they play against Mississippi State. Obviously, an emotional game for Vic Schaefer. He coached there from 2012 to 2020. I'm not sure if this was his first time playing at Mississippi State. Um, Probably, since this is our first year in the SEC, but you never know. So either way, right, an emotional game returning to the place where he made a name for himself, right, where he was able to get a job like Texas because of his success at Mississippi State. And this was a close game for the women. You know what I mean? They say any given day in the SEC, you can't take days off, you can't take opponents for granted. And this was a very tough game, right? Mississippi State is above 500 on the season, but they're 6-9 in the SEC, so it makes sense. A really tough conference, but they took Texas to the wire, right? 68-64. Had a chance to cut it to 2 at the very end, did not, and then ultimately Texas took care of business at the free throw line, which they've done in a lot of games, making the most free throws per game in the entire country. So when you look at it, Texas had 26 points at halftime. We know that the last 2 games they scored under 25 before halftime. So just a little bit over that threshold with 26, but they were down by 1 as Mississippi State had 27 points at the half, right? So the number 1 team in the country went into the break down 1 point, but then they came out and took care of business, ultimately outscoring them by 5 points in the second half to win the game 68-64. And I want to highlight Shea Holly, right? Because you go into the game, right? You go into the break down 1, not really, huge cause for concern. It's basketball, but you're the number 1 team in the country, and there's all the pressure, all the weight in the world, on your shoulders, right? Mississippi State is in the locker room with a bunch of confidence. We got the number 1 team down at halftime, right? And you expect, okay, like this is when a Madison Booker would come out and take over, or this is when a Rory Harmon would come out and take over. And they certainly did, good work in the second half as well, had good games overall. But Shea Holly led the team in scoring with 16 points. All 16 of her points came in the second half. So you talk about a veteran presence, a veteran leadership, you know what I'm saying? Veteran leadership. That's what Shea Holly displayed last night in Starksville. Coming out with 16 points in the second half, hitting 4 threes. This is a team that only makes 3 threes a game. They made 7 last night. And so when they want to shoot threes, they can't. All right. They're just more of a paint and mid-range type of team. But like I said, Shea Holly huge in the second half, 16 points. Rory Harmon, right? She ended up with 10 points and 7 assists, excuse me. Madison Booker had 12 points. Jack had 15 points and 11 rebounds. So those were some huge contributions. But, like I said, game ball definitely goes to Shea Holly. 16 points all in the second half. And then her and Rory Harmon combined to go 6 of 9 from 3. Right. And so they were lighting it up. And that's a huge reason why Texas was able to take care of business. And so now they have one more game against Florida on Sunday, and South Carolina, who they're tied with as number 1 in the SEC standings right now. They play against, I looked this up earlier. Who does South Carolina play against? Give me a second. But anyways, both teams are tied in the SEC standings, and to decide who will be the number 1 overall seed in the SEC tournament. If both of these teams win on Sunday, it's going to be a coin flip. That is so crazy, right? That the number 1 seed in the SEC tournament, after these teams have played all year, is going to come down to a coin flip. But that seems to be, they play Kentucky. So Kentucky, top 15 team in the country, they may have a chance to knock them off, but it is at South Carolina. But yes, if South Carolina beats Kentucky and Texas beats Florida on Sunday, there will be a coin flip to decide who gets the number one seed in the SEC tournament. And if Texas loses out on the one seed because of a coin flip, now both teams gave each other the one SEC loss. So somebody's probably like it's fair, but a coin flip. Texas could end up being the 2 seed in the SEC tournament because of a coin flip. And that's just crazy. But we'll stay in the present. Good win against Mississippi State. Take care of business against Sunday. Take care of business against Florida on Sunday to even put yourself in position to be a part of the coin flip, right? And we'll just have to root like hell for Kentucky on Sunday to see if they can knock off South Carolina. All right. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into Trey Johnson, right? Another really, really good Texas player that's not going to enjoy some tournament success, or may not enjoy some tournament success. But we have to talk about what he's been able to accomplish this year and where we would rank him amongst the Texas greats, because he's put himself in that conversation most definitely. We discuss after the break. All right, so Texas has now lost back-to-back games after the big win over Kentucky. They've lost to South Carolina, and then tough game against Arkansas. They could not find a way to win it on the road. And I mean, now this Texas team is desperate, right? You have to win the last 3 regular season games, and I would think that you have to win at least a couple SEC tournament games, right? Just to solidify yourself in the tournament. They could still make it, but they're not doing themselves any favors, right? And this team not making the tournament at all is very realistic. But for some reason, we still have hope and still have some joy watching this Texas basketball team, and it's really all because of Trey Johnson, the true freshman, right? I mean, man, what he is doing is absolutely crazy. I mean, he has a legitimate argument for player of the year, right? Leading the SEC in scoring, averaging 21 points a game as a true freshman straight out of high school, shooting almost 40% from 3, 45% from the field, 88% from the line. I mean, Trey Johnson has just been absolutely phenomenal, right? I mean, literally doing all that he can to drag this team to the tournament. And then you look at some of his recent performances: 39 against Arkansas, 29 against South Carolina, 32 against Kentucky, 24 against Alabama, 25 against Arkansas. You know what I mean? Like 30 against Texas A&M, 26 against Tennessee, the number 1 team in the country at the time, 24 against UConn, 21. You know what I mean? Like 29 in his first game against Ohio State, 28 in his second game. I mean, the things that he is doing scoring the basketball, he is an NBA level scorer right now. He is making NBA level plays right now at the University of Texas. And it's time to have the conversation. Obviously, he's not touching Kevin Durant, right? Kevin Durant, as impressive as his 21 per game is, Trey Johnson is, KD did 25 and 11 rebounds and a couple of blocks per game. Like, he just was on a different level. So KD's obviously going to be number 1. There's some people that'll put TJ Ford at number 1 just because of what he was able to accomplish at the University of Texas, player of the year as well. Took a team to the Sweet 16, then took a team to the Final Four. So in terms of like basketball, who's meant the most to the program, a lot of people would say TJ Ford, even though Kevin Durant obviously is the best player by far to come through the program. However you rank them, that's probably 1 and 2, right? Then I would go LaMarcus Aldridge, number 3. Just a hell of a player at the 40 acres, what he was able to do in the NBA. That means something to me because that's, putting on for Texas, right? Like LaMarcus Aldridge went to Texas, So I would probably put him number 3. Probably some other players you have more of an emotional connection with at the 40 acres. But, like I said, I would have to put LaMarcus Aldridge at 3. Or you put Trey Johnson at 3. Either way, at LaMarcus Aldridge and Trey Johnson for me are 3 and 4. All right, there's no doubt in my mind that Trey Johnson is one of the 4 best players to ever come through this program. We've seen it now. And even if they don't make the tournament, even if they don't get a tournament win, I think he still needs to be on that Mount Rushmore of Texas basketball players. I mean, because man, I mean, like I said, what he is doing straight out of high school, going for 39, 30, 32, 28, 27, like it's regular, legit player of the year in the conference and the nation candidate. Got to be a lock to be an All-American, I would think. Like, I mean, Trey Johnson has just been absolutely phenomenal. And like I said, it's tough that you can't go on a tournament run with that type of player. But I definitely think he's on the Mount Rushmore of Texas basketball players, one of the greatest to ever come through the program, regardless of what happens in March. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.